Our next topic involves an application of cryptography that probably most people have used before, and that's file encryption. Now, for the purposes of the CEH exam, you probably won't need to know too much about it, but it may ask you about certain tools that you could use and different methods of encrypting files. So let's go ahead and take a look at file encryption now. Now, individual files and folders on an operating system, on a file system, can be encrypted on the host to prevent access to any sensitive files you might have on any shared computers. In other words, if more than one person uses a computer, you might want to encrypt certain files or folders. And by and large, you can encrypt a file by itself. You can also encrypt a folder by itself and all of the files inside it. There are also ways, using something like TrueCrypt, for example, that you can create a virtual drive that's basically created from a folder or a huge file, and it encrypts the contents of that entire folder. And then as it's encrypted, it just looks like a giant file on your drive that's encrypted. And then when you mount that drive, in other words, you decrypt it, it assumes the form of another drive letter. And I'll show you how TrueCrypt does that in a moment. Some examples of some popular file and folder encryption programs includes the popular Microsoft EFS that's been around for probably several years, all the way from Windows 2000 and beyond, and it had some issues when it first came out, and those issues have slowly been fixed, and it's actually not a bad way to encrypt files and folders on a Windows box these days, especially on newer versions of Windows such as Windows 7 and 8. There's also an open source program called TrueCrypt that I'll demonstrate for you in a moment that basically creates virtual drives or volumes. There's also several examples out there of proprietary software that's included on USB sticks that you might purchase that can encrypt the folder and file contents on a USB stick itself. So let's go ahead and take a look at TrueCrypt, and I'll give you an example of how it can create an encrypted volume on your file system to encrypt certain files and folders. Now, TrueCrypt basically is open source software. It's free, and you can download it and create an encrypted volume. The first thing you want to do is decide what drive letter you want it to be, because that drive letter will show up when it's decrypted. Again, it'll show up as another drive letter, although it's typically a huge encrypted file container on your file system. So let's say we want it to be the M drive, and we'll create this volume here. And it's going to give us several options. Create an encrypted file container, which is the most common option. Encrypt a non-system partition or drive, or encrypt the entire system partition or the entire system drive. Now, we're not going to do that, but TrueCrypt gives you those options. And you can encrypt an entire partition or drive as long as it's not bootable. You can even create one that is bootable. However, using this option, you'll typically have to have something like a USB key that you can stick into the computer when it boots in order to provide a password or private key to decrypt a hard drive. And if you don't have this USB key available, it won't decrypt. We're going to stick with the basics here, create an encrypted file container, and click Next. And you can have a standard TrueCrypt volume, which basically is a normal TrueCrypt volume encrypted file container, and then you can have a hidden one. And this hidden one basically is kind of double encryption. You create your TrueCrypt volume, and you provide a password for it, and if someone forces you to, you give them the password to that volume. But what they don't know is inside that there's also another hidden TrueCrypt volume that's there. So basically you're giving them what they want, but what they don't know is that there's another volume there inside, and TrueCrypt can do that for you. And you can select a file, a container, or so forth to create a volume out of. So we can select this file, and then we can go to, say, Documents, for example, and select something like the VTC CEH folder, or we can even create a new one. Let's create a new folder, and we're going to say TC for TrueCrypt. We're going to say OK for that, and then we're going to come down here and select it. We'll say Open and Save, and we're going to create a file called TC. We'll call that our encrypted folder there and file. So we say Next. We can select an algorithm, and you can select from many of them. I'm going to select AES because it's very strong. You can also select certain hash algorithms. I'm going to go with 512. It's stronger. Click Next. And how big do I want this to be? I'm just going to say 5 meg just for an example here. And you can select kilobytes or gigabytes, obviously. I'm going to select Next here, and I'm going to give it the password I want it to have. And obviously the stronger the password, the better the encryption, the better the strength. So use a complex password here. You can also use a key file too if you have a public-private key pair. We're going to stick with our short password. That's 10 digits, by the way. And then it's going to create the volume. It's going to ask you to move the mouse around to create a random pool for it to derive the key from. And it's going to let you select the file system and the cluster size. And you can choose a dynamic one if you want. So I'm going to say format, and it has successfully created the volume. We click next here, and we are done. So let's click cancel here. And now we can mount the M drive. So let's go and select our file to mount. And what we're looking for is the TC folder here. And this is a simple file that can't be read by anything unless it's mounted. So we're going to mount all of them. And it's going to ask us for our password. We're going to put that in. And then it's mounted as the M drive. And now we can put things into this drive the way we would use any other drive. And when we dismount it, which is recommended using TrueCrypt, it's just an encrypted file that no one can read. So that's basically TrueCrypt and how to use it to create an encrypted file container that's mountable as a drive on your system.